You've watched them destroy lovers, friends, even blood relatives, smearing reputations, weaponizing silence, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only confusion and shattered self-worth. But there's one person they cannot break, no matter how hard they try. One type they instinctively avoid. One soul whose very presence triggers a quiet panic in their hollow core. It's not the loud rebel, the vengeful ex, or the courtroom adversary. It's the calm, unshakable individual who refuses to play their game of chaos and control. This isn't about aggression, it's about sovereignty. And today, we expose the hidden truth. Narcissists are absolutely terrified of the one person they cannot manipulate, because that person has already won the only battle that matters, the battle for their own inner peace, their own unshakable truth, and their own unbreakable boundaries that no amount of gaslighting can erode. Picture this. They deploy their full arsenal: silent treatment to induce panic, triangulation to provoke jealousy, sudden rage to create fear, love bombing to rehook, and none of it lands. No tears. No frantic texts. No desperate pleas for validation. Just calm. Just silence that doesn't beg to be filled. Just boundaries that stand like stone walls, not because they are angry, but because they are resolved. That's the moment the narcissist's mask cracks. Not from fury, but from sheer terror. Because they've encountered someone who doesn't need their performance to feel whole, someone who doesn't measure their worth against the narcissist's distorted mirror. And that kind of inner peace? It's their ultimate kryptonite, the one force their entire illusion cannot withstand. Why does this cut so deep for survivors? Because you've been conditioned to believe that surviving a narcissist means outshouting them, outsmarting them, or exposing them publicly. But the real victory is far quieter and far more powerful. The person the narcissist fears isn't fighting them. They've simply exited the war. They stopped needing the narcissist to be wrong in order to feel right. They stopped tying their identity to the narcissist's lies. And in that liberation, they became untouchable, not through strength of force, but through the radical act of self-possession that renders the narcissist's entire system of control completely obsolete and irrelevant in their life. You weren't weak because you broke under their pressure. You were human, wired for connection, empathy, and trust in a world that weaponizes those very qualities. But the person they fear? They didn't avoid breaking by being stronger, they avoided it by healing faster. They learned that boundaries aren't walls to keep love out, but gates to let real connection in. And once they sealed their energy, once they stopped offering their emotional oxygen to the narcissist's fire, they became immune. Not because they are perfect, but because they are no longer available as fuel for the narcissist's insatiable hunger for validation and control. This isn't about moral superiority or spiritual arrogance. It's about psychological sovereignty, the unshakable understanding that your worth was never negotiable and never dependent on their approval. The feared one doesn't engage in debates about who's right. They don't waste breath explaining their truth to someone who only speaks the language of distortion. They simply live it. And in that living, they become invisible to the narcissist's hunger, because you cannot consume what refuses to be food, and you cannot control what refuses to be moved by your chaos. You were taught that love means sacrifice, that staying proves devotion, that giving more proves loyalty. But the person the narcissist fears knows the brutal truth. Love without boundaries is just slow self-annihilation. They don't offer love to fix the narcissist. They protect their peace to preserve themselves. They refuse to drown so the narcissist can float. They understand that real compassion includes saying no, and that true strength often looks like walking away in silence rather than staying to fight a war you never chose. And that quiet refusal to be a martyr? That's the revolution the narcissist cannot survive. This video isn't here to shame you for still carrying wounds or for having once believed their lies. It's here to illuminate the path from survival to true freedom, not through revenge, not through exposure, but through the relentless, daily choice to prioritize your peace over their chaos. Because the moment you stop needing the narcissist to see your truth, to apologize, or even to acknowledge you, you become the one thing they can never destroy. A free human being whose value exists independently of their validation or their violence. The most insidious lie they implanted in your mind? That your sensitivity was a flaw, your empathy a weakness, your desire for connection a vulnerability to be exploited. But the person they fear knows better. sensitivity without surrender is unbreakable strength. Empathy without self-erasure is unshakable power. And the ability to feel deeply while still protecting your core? That's not naivety, that's mastery. And mastery terrifies those who have spent a lifetime running from their own unhealed pain by projecting it onto others. You've been gaslit into thinking that if you were just stronger, smarter, or more aware, you wouldn't have fallen for them. But the truth is simpler. You fell because you were human. The feared one didn't avoid the fall, they learned how to rise without looking back. They didn't harden their heart, they fortified their boundaries. They didn't stop loving, they stopped offering love to those who only knew how to take. And in that shift, they became untouchable, not because they are cold, but because their warmth is reserved for those who bring reverence, not hunger. So let's shatter the final illusion. Narcissists don't fear the angry, the loud, or the vengeful. They fear the peaceful. They fear the silent who've stopped listening to lies. They fear the calm who've stopped reacting to chaos. Because that calm isn't passive, it's the ultimate declaration of independence. And that person? That person is you, not because you're special, but because you're ready to choose yourself over their hunger, one unshakable boundary at a time. The war isn't out there. It's within. And you've already won. At the very core of the narcissist's fragile psyche lies a single, suffocating dependency. They need you to react. Your pain, your rage, your confusion, your desperate attempts to fix things, these aren't just side effects of their behavior, they're the main course. Your emotional turbulence is their oxygen, their proof that they still matter, that they still have power. But the one they fear? Their energy is like still water, calm, clear, and utterly unresponsive to the narcissist's attempts to stir chaos. No fuel. No drama. No evidence that the narcissist's existence even registers in their inner world. And without that proof, the narcissist is forced to stare into the void they've spent a lifetime running from, the terrifying emptiness of being irrelevant. Their entire identity is constructed like a house of mirrors, each surface reflecting back a distorted image of grandeur, control, and desirability. But the feared one doesn't hold up a mirror. They simply walk past it, unimpressed. They don't see a god. They don't even see a monster. They see a deeply wounded human stuck in a performance that no longer fools anyone. And that act of seeing, without judgment, without fear, without engagement, is the death knell for the narcissist's illusion. Because indifference isn't cruelty, it's erasure. And erasure is the one fate their ego cannot survive. They've mistaken control for connection their entire lives, believing that if they can dictate your emotions, your choices, your very sense of reality, then they've truly won you. So when they encounter someone who cannot be controlled, not through guilt, not through charm, not through rage, they don't feel challenged. They feel annihilated. Because the feared one's autonomy isn't a rebellion, it's a revelation that the narcissist was never in control to begin with. And that truth shatters the foundation of their entire existence, leaving only panic in its wake. This is why they escalate so desperately when faced with calm. They'll smear you more viciously, hoover with sudden vulnerability, or play the victim to mutual friends, not because they are gaining power, but because they are losing it. The feared one's silence isn't passive acceptance, it's an impenetrable boundary that says, you no longer rent space in my mind. And that eviction notice triggers an existential crisis in the narcissist, because without a stage, the performance means nothing. Without an audience, the actor is just a man in a costume, alone in the dark. They cannot tolerate a witness who doesn't flinch. Most people react to their manipulation with fear, anger, or pleading, reactions the narcissist knows how to exploit. But the feared one? They observe without absorbing. They see the manipulation not as a personal attack, but as a symptom of deep inner poverty. They don't take projections personally, they return them with quiet clarity, and then walk away. That's not weakness. That's emotional mastery. And mastery is a language the narcissist doesn't speak, cannot mimic, and will never understand. Their greatest fear isn't exposure or public shame, it's irrelevance. They would rather be hated than ignored. But the feared one grants them neither. They don't campaign against them. They don't warn others out of bitterness. They simply live as if the narcissist never mattered, never defined them, never altered their path. That kind of peace isn't passive, it's absolute. And absolute peace in the face of their chaos is the one thing they cannot weaponize, cannot twist, and cannot destroy. It's a sentence with no appeal. They've spent their lives categorizing people as either tools, to be used, or threats, to be neutralized. But the feared one fits neither box. They are whole. They are complete without the narcissist's validation. They don't seek to prove anything, fix anything, or win anything. And that wholeness leaves the narcissist with no handle, no hook, no point of entry. You cannot manipulate someone who has nothing to prove and nothing to lose. And that impenetrability? It's psychological death to a predator who only knows how to exist through domination. Your trauma likely made you reactive, hypervigilant to their moods, desperate to restore peace, willing to sacrifice your truth to avoid their rage. But the feared one's healing made them responsive, not reactive. They feel deeply, yes, but they don't let emotion hijack their boundaries. They process pain without letting it dictate their actions. They understand that feeling hurt doesn't mean they have to engage. And that balance between empathy and self-protection? It's a fortress no smear campaign, no love bomb, no silent treatment can ever breach. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming clear. The feared one doesn't hate the narcissist, they simply refuse to let them define reality. They know that real love shouldn't cost your sanity, that true intimacy shouldn't require surrender, and that lasting peace shouldn't need constant negotiation. They've learned that compassion for others must begin with compassion for self, and that includes the radical act of walking away from those who only know how to take. So remember this, the narcissist's terror isn't sparked by your strength in volume or your power in confrontation. It's ignited by your stillness, the quiet, unshakable certainty that your worth isn't up for debate, your peace isn't negotiable, and your energy belongs to you alone. And that stillness? It's not the absence of action. It's the presence of sovereignty. And sovereignty is the one force that doesn't just resist the narcissist, it renders them completely, utterly obsolete. The turning point doesn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a public expose. It arrives in the quietest moment of all, the day you stop checking their social media. The day you no longer rehearse what you'd say if they called. The day their name no longer sends a jolt through your nervous system. That's when they lose, not because you defeated them, but because you disappeared from their psychological battlefield. You didn't win the war, you simply left the arena, and in doing so, you deprived them of the only thing they truly needed, your energy, your attention, your emotional reaction. And without that, their performance has no audience, no meaning, no power. Watch how they unravel when they realize you're truly gone, not just physically, but energetically. They'll hoover with sudden vulnerability, sending late-night messages about how much they've changed or how they miss your connection. They'll smear you to mutual friends, painting you as unstable or cruel. Or they'll play the victim, claiming you abandoned them without cause. But it's all noise, desperate, flailing attempts to provoke a reaction, any reaction, that proves they still matter. And the feared one? They don't engage. They don't justify. They don't explain. They simply exist, out of reach, out of mind, out of their control. They'll call you cold, heartless, or unchanged, not because it's true, but because your calm exposes their hunger. What they really mean is, you're no longer feeding me. And without your emotional supply, their entire ecosystem collapses. They can't manipulate silence. They can't gaslight indifference. They can't discard someone who's already discarded them in their heart. And that's the ultimate humiliation, being rendered irrelevant by the very person they once believed they owned. This is the psychological plot twist they never see coming. Their downfall isn't caused by your revenge or your exposure. It's caused by your absence, specifically, the kind of absence that doesn't beg to be noticed. It's not the dramatic exit that wounds them, it's the quiet, sustained peace that erases them from your narrative entirely. You don't curse their name. You just stop saying it. You don't fight their lies. You just stop believing they have any power over your truth. And that erasure? It's the most complete destruction possible, because it happens without them even realizing it's happening. They'll try to pull you back with guilt disguised as nostalgia, after all we've been through, or I thought you were different. But the feared one knows the brutal truth. nothing was ever done for them. Every gift, every sacrifice, every grand gesture was performed for the narcissist's own ego, to feed their image, to secure your compliance, to maintain control. And you can't guilt someone who's already free, who understands that real love doesn't keep score or demand payment in emotional currency. Don't mistake their panic for power. Their fear isn't about losing you, it's about losing the proof that they still matter in the world. You're not a person to them in that moment of desperation. You're a lifeline, a mirror, a battery. And when you disappear, they are forced to face the one reality they've spent a lifetime avoiding. They are alone with themselves, and the self they've neglected is a void they cannot fill with charm, conquest, or performance. This is where real power shifts, not with a shout, but with finality. The day you stop hoping they'll change. The day you stop analyzing their behavior for hidden meaning. The day you realize your healing doesn't require their apology, their acknowledgement, or even their existence in your life. And in that finality, you become unbreakable, not because you've hardened your heart, but because you've stopped letting their chaos dictate your inner weather. You are the calm after the storm, and the storm no longer has permission to enter. They'll rage. They'll lie. They'll rewrite history to paint themselves as the victim and you as the villain. But projection is their last, gasping defense mechanism. Because deep down, beneath the bluster and the blame, they know the truth, they weren't discarded. They were seen. Truly seen. Not as the hero or the monster of their own narrative, but as a broken human who chose manipulation over connection. And being seen, without distortion, without fear, without need, is the death of the narcissist's illusion. You are no longer their mirror. You are your own light. And your refusal to reflect their chaos, their blame, their hunger back at them is the final nail in the coffin of their control. Because a narcissist without a reflection isn't powerful, they are invisible. They cease to exist in the only way they know how, through the eyes of others. And when those eyes look away, not in anger, but in peace, the performance ends. Not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a door that was never meant to stay open. You are no longer their mirror. You are your own source of light. And your refusal to reflect their chaos, their blame, or their desperate hunger back at them is the final, silent verdict on their entire performance. Because a narcissist without an audience isn't just powerless, they are non-existent. Their identity was never internal. It was borrowed, rented, and performed for the approval of others. And when the last believer walks away, not with hatred, but with peace, the stage goes dark. The spotlight dies. And all that remains is the hollow echo of a role played too long by a soul who never knew how to just be. This turning point isn't just your liberation, it's their reckoning. For the first time, they must face the raw, unfiltered truth. They can mimic love, but they cannot create it. They can perform devotion, but they cannot sustain it. And without someone to perform for, without a willing audience to believe the act, they are nothing but static in the dark, a ghost haunting a body that never learned how to feel, how to connect, or how to simply be human without a mask. Now, observe the collapse, not with glee, but with clarity. Without your emotional energy, their charisma begins to dull like a blade left in the rain. Their stories lose their luster, their charm feels rehearsed, even desperate. New targets sense the hunger beneath the polish, the subtle panic in their eyes when admiration isn't instant, the frantic need to prove they are still relevant. Because authenticity can't be faked forever. And you were the last great illusion that held their entire facade together. Your departure didn't just remove a person, it removed the final pillar of their performance, and now the whole structure is crumbling from the inside out. They'll cycle faster, jumping from person to person, conquest to conquest, chasing the high you once gave them. But it's never the same. Because you weren't just another source of supply. You were the one who saw glimpses of their humanity and still stayed, until you realized staying was self-annihilation. Now, they scramble, using the same lines, the same intensity, the same manufactured vulnerability. But the magic is gone. Because magic requires belief. And the world is starting to stop believing in them, one awakened woman at a time. Their social mask begins to slip in plain sight. Friends notice the pattern. The sudden devaluation after intimacy, the smear campaigns when someone sets a boundary, the way they discard people the moment they stop mirroring their grandiosity perfectly. Lovers sense the emptiness behind the passion, the mechanical nature of their touch, the absence of true presence, the way they perform closeness without ever being emotionally available. The illusion is thinning, and people are finally seeing the hunger beneath the hunger. Internally, they're in free fall. No amount of new supply silences the voice that now whispers louder than ever, "You're empty." The void you once temporarily masked with your warmth, your attention, your surrender is now roaring. Because the void isn't about attention, it's about self. And they still have no answer to the question that haunts them every night when the lights go out and the performance ends: who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without someone to perform for? And that silence is unbearable. They'll rewrite history with surgical precision, claiming you were toxic, manipulative, or emotionally unstable. Not because it's true, but because your truth exposes their fraud. If they can destroy your credibility in the eyes of others, they can restore their illusion of superiority, if only for a little while longer. It's not about justice or truth. It's about survival. Because in their mind, if the world believes you were the problem, then they never have to face the devastating reality: they were never capable of real love. They were only ever capable of consumption. But truth is louder than their lies. Every survivor who walks away chips away at their facade. Every boundary you set becomes a crack in their armor. And slowly, the world stops feeding them and starts seeing them. Not as the charismatic enigma they pretend to be, but as the emotionally stunted predator they've always been. Their supply dries up not because people are cruel, but because people are finally awake. And awakening is contagious. The more who see, the harder it becomes for the narcissist to find new believers for their tired, hollow act. Their collapse isn't dramatic. It's quiet. A slow, inevitable fade into irrelevance as people choose authenticity over performance, presence over intensity, and consistency over chaos. The market for their illusion dries up, because the truth is finally trending. And in the silence left behind, they are forced to sit with the one thing they've spent a lifetime running from: themselves. No audience. No performance. Just the raw, unfiltered reality of their own emptiness, with no one left to blame but the reflection in the mirror. They'll never understand why you left. Because in their narrative, they gave you everything: passion, attention, drama, devotion. But you didn't want their spectacle. You wanted safety. You wanted someone who could hold you without needing to own you, someone whose love didn't vanish the moment you asked for consistency or emotional honesty. They mistake volume for depth, urgency for commitment, and control for care. And because they cannot fathom real intimacy, they assume you were flawed for wanting it. But the flaw was never yours, it was theirs. Their tragedy is not yours to carry, to fix, or to mourn. Let them spiral in the silence they created. Let them face the mirror without your reflection, without your energy, without your belief in their performance. Because your freedom began the moment you stopped being the answer to their existential crisis. You were never responsible for filling their void. That was their work, not yours. You were only ever responsible for protecting your light, your peace, and your right to exist without being mined for their ego's survival. And as they search desperately for their next source, recycling your lines, mimicking your tenderness, using your vulnerability as a blueprint for their next conquest, you're doing something radical, something revolutionary. You're rebuilding yourself. Not for an audience. Not for validation. Not to prove anything to anyone. But because you finally, deeply believe, you are worth more than supply. Your body is not a resource. Your empathy is not a weakness. Your presence is not a commodity. You are a sanctuary. And you are the only one who gets to decide who enters. Here is the final, unshakable truth. The person the narcissist fears isn't special because they're extraordinary. They're extraordinary because they chose to be ordinary in the most radical way possible. They stopped performing. They stopped explaining. They stopped shrinking to make the narcissist feel big. And in that ordinary act of self-possession, they became untouchable. Your worth was never up for debate. Your peace was never negotiable. And your energy was always yours to guard. The narcissist's fear isn't of your power, it's of your refusal to lend them yours any longer. Real strength isn't found in fighting their war, it's found in refusing to fight on their terms. It's in knowing that your healing doesn't require their apology, your freedom doesn't need their permission, and your future doesn't include their presence. The feared one doesn't waste energy trying to prove the narcissist wrong. They simply live in a truth so solid, so quiet, so unshakable, that the narcissist's lies can't even find a foothold. And that's not weakness, that's the ultimate victory. Healing begins the moment you stop seeing their behavior as a reflection of your worth. When you realize that someone who treats your soul as a battleground will never treat your heart as a home. You weren't broken because they used you. You were brilliant because you survived the storm, and wiser because you walked away before it drowned you. Your sensitivity wasn't your downfall, your belief that they could change was. And now, you know better. Now, you choose better. You are not damaged goods. You are not too sensitive or too trusting. You are a reclaimed sanctuary. Every boundary you set is a brick in the temple of your renewed self. Every no is an act of devotion to your own soul. Every moment of silence you choose over chaos is a declaration, my peace is sacred. Let them call you cold or distant. What they really mean is, you're no longer feeding my hunger. And that's not a flaw, it's your liberation, your sovereignty, your freedom. Let their hunger remain their prison. You are free to love someone who doesn't need to consume you to feel whole. Someone whose presence doesn't leave you emptier, but fuller, calmer, more yourself. Someone who doesn't see your empathy as a weakness to exploit, but as a strength to honor. You deserve a love that doesn't require you to disappear to make them feel seen. A love that grows in stillness, not chaos. A love that stays, even when the lights go out and the performance ends. Every time you choose yourself over their craving, you reclaim a piece of your stolen power. Every boundary is a resurrection. Every silence is a revolution. You are not selfish for protecting your energy, you are sovereign. And sovereignty terrifies narcissists more than any exposure ever could, because it exposes the lie they've sold the world, that they are powerful. In truth, they are powerless without their supply. But you? You are powerful with or without them. One day, you'll sit in a quiet room, and the thought of them won't stir a single ripple in your soul. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've forgiven yourself for ever believing you needed them to be worthy. You'll realize their rage was never about you, it was about their own terror of being ordinary. And your calm? That was never weakness, it was the quiet roar of a soul that finally came home to itself. In that stillness, you'll understand, you were never the victim. You were the victory. You were never the problem. You were the mirror that showed them their emptiness, and they broke the glass rather than face the truth. But you? You survived the shattering. And from those shards, you didn't just rebuild, you evolved. You transformed pain into clarity, betrayal into boundaries, confusion into conviction. You didn't lose yourself in them. You found yourself in the aftermath. And that self is stronger, wiser, and more whole than they ever deserved to witness. Your future belongs to someone who doesn't just want your warmth, but protects your flame. Who doesn't just admire your resilience, but defends your peace. Who knows that love isn't taken through manipulation, control, or performance. It's given freely, and only when both souls are fully present, fully free, and fully respected. You will not be reduced to a function. You will not be valued only when you're giving. You will be cherished in your stillness, in your silence, in your ordinary moments, because real love doesn't need a show. It just needs you. The narcissist is terrified of you, not because you destroyed them, but because you refused to be destroyed. And in that refusal, you became the one truth they can never erase, never distort, never control. You were always enough. You always will be. And no one, not even them, gets to decide that for you. Your peace is your power. Your silence is your strength. And your freedom? That's your final, unassailable truth. Walk in it. Live in it. Breathe in it. Because you are not here to survive their chaos. You are here to thrive in your own light.